Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues on the House Judiciary Committee. For the record, Delegate Adrian Bawafo here in support of House Bill 1081, the Unmask the Hate Act. This legislation takes a necessary and long overdue step to protect Marylanders from intimidation and harassment carried out under the cover of anonymity. HB 1081 prohibits the use of masks, hoods, or other face coverings when used to threaten or intimidate individuals or communities. For over a century, as this committee knows too well, groups like the Ku Klux Klan and other extremist organizations have used face coverings to conceal their identities while terrorizing communities. While anti-masking harassment legislation and laws exist in some jurisdictions, many over the years have been repealed or have been weakened or are inadequately enforced. Today, we are witnessing a resurgence of mass intimidation, not only from white supremacist groups, but from individuals seeking to harass and instill fear while remaining anonymous. Since October 7th, there has been a significant rise in mass harassment, particularly targeting our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community. Additionally, there have been a rise nationwide in attacks on peaceful Muslim protesters, most notably in the most recent incident in UCLA, where a mass mob was armed with pepper spray and fireworks targeting demonstrators. We've seen individuals exploiting anonymity to threaten others on college campuses and in places of worship and in public spaces. This trend is deeply concerning to all of us. People should not have to live in fear for their safety simply because they are attending school or practicing their faith or participating in public life. HB 1081 is carefully crafted to balance public safety and constitutional rights. This bill does not infringe on free speech or peaceful assembly. Instead, it focuses on those who deliberately conceal their identities while engaging in harassment, threats, or intimidation. Importantly, it excludes and has exceptions for those masking for religious, medical, professional, or weather-related reasons. Let me be clear. This bill only applies if you are wearing a mask with the intent of committing a crime, such as intentionally harassing, intimidating, or threatening somebody. Contrary to popular belief on Twitter, this bill does not restrict your right to wear a mask at any time here in the state. This legislation ensures that Maryland remains a place where hate-based intimidation has no place. It protects our communities, upholds public trust, and strengthens our ability to hold bad actors accountable. For these reasons, I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair. Always a pleasure to be with Judiciary, even towards the end of the evening. Meredith Weisel, for the record, with the Anti-Defamation League. Too often, masks are used as tools for crimes of hate, lending anonymity to those targeting individuals or groups because of their backgrounds. This legislation will help protect our communities to ensure accountability while upholding free speech and health exemptions. Bad actors we are continuing to see are using masks, face coverings to conceal their identity, and they are deliberately harassing, intimidating, and targeting others without facing consequences. With this new resurgence of mask harassment, it is crucial to restore and strengthen these measures to protect our vulnerable communities while allowing for health considerations and religious expressions. The original anti-mask laws date back actually to the rent riots back in 1845, as well as other mid-20th century laws to curb behavior, as was noted by the KKK. These bills at the time were meant to prevent mass groups from engaging in public intimidation or violence. The language of the initial laws, while they addressed and dealt with mask intimidations, did not provide exceptions to wearing masks, which is what we're discussing today. We're pursuing this legislation because it seeks to prioritize public safety by prohibiting individuals, again, intentionally concealing their faces to menace or threaten another person or community. Our goal is simple. Individuals and groups who engage in harassment and intimidation, which is fueled by hate and bias, must not be able to hide behind their masks to avoid consequences for their conduct. For these reasons, we ask for a favorable report on House Bill 1081. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Candace Jackson, Vice President of Public Policy and Strategic Partnerships for the Greater Baltimore Urban League, an organization dedicated to ensuring African Americans and other minority groups secure economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. We strive daily to empower communities across the state of Maryland and to transform lives in the areas of education, health, workforce development, and entrepreneurship. I am here today to represent our membership as we advocate for the passage of HB 1081. As a civil rights organization that is over a century old, much progress has been made to eradicate systemic efforts to discriminate, disenfranchise, while ensuring human rights for all. However, today there has been a resurgence in hate-driven threats, harassment, intimidation, and assaults by bad actors. These individuals and groups choose to use masks to conceal their identities while targeting vulnerable communities. The Greater Baltimore Urban League serves the entire state of Maryland, and we do not condone any action of hate towards its residents, especially those in marginalized communities. More specifically, your constituents who are Black, Latino, Jewish, or LGBTQ+ are not protected against these types of attacks by masked individuals currently. Maryland is a leading example in so many ways and so many areas of inclusion, but we are behind in having a criminal penalty for this type of behavior. Without this bill, it makes it difficult for victims to get justice and for masked bad actors to be deterred for lack of consequence. The well-documented history of the known domestic terrorist organizations who burn crosses, lynch, and storm capitals must be stopped at every pass. This bill will help to protect vulnerable communities in the current and emboldened climate of intimidation and grave uncertainty. This bill is about accountability, order, protection, and inclusion. Please note that HB 1081 excludes those who wear face coverings for legitimate purposes. On behalf of the residents that you serve in Maryland and for the security, respect, and community of tolerance that we hope to continue to grow here, we request your support to move the Unmask Hate Act forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. Who would have thought that an anti-masking bill would bring so many emails to my inbox? And sorry. That's okay. Equally as ironic is that as somebody who was really tired of masked Karens yelling at me for the last 5 years, that I would have some concerns about the implementation of this bill. So some of the emails that I got, I thought were shockingly interesting. I mean, sometimes you get a bunch of crazy stuff, but these were pretty well thought out, I thought. So I'll just give you a chance to sort of respond to some of it. But one of the points that was made was that police are gonna have a hard time actually deciding. I mean, they have to essentially like be a judge, because this is a complex bill. There's a ton of carve-outs here, and they're going to have to be a judge as to whether or not the covering is inside these exemptions. And like everyone's probably just going to be like, it's for medical purposes. I mean, because paper was used for medical purposes during COVID. We can debate that later, whether or not that's real, but that's the truth of it. So how is a police officer on the ground going to be able to discern between the different masks and whether or not they're technically medical, they believe them to be medical, and if they're legitimate or not? Are we asking them to be the judge and the jury here?
I'm happy to. So the beginning of the bill, I think, is the key part of it. So certainly, just like a lot of bills, I think law enforcement would have to be trained. I think it's and that is one of the things that we are certainly talking with them in the various jurisdictions where we are looking at these bills. But you have to not be intentionally harassing, intimidating, or threatening a person. So even if you have a reason, for a medical reason, COVID, flu, I mean, there's a ton of things going around. If you're not intentionally harassing, intimidating, and threatening a person where that person also has a fear for their physical safety, then there's no reason why you should be, and that is why those carve-outs are there. There's no reason why that you should be held accountable. But if you're walking down the street, even if you're part of a peaceful rally, protest, and you're not intentionally intimidating, harassing, threatening an individual for fear of their public safety or their physical safety, then there's no reason why this bill would apply to them. And I think that's the distinction that people are missing. That element has to be there for that.
What if the person, it was like a dispute in a grocery grocery store, somebody bumps somebody with a cart, whatever.
Yeah.
The person's wearing a mask and the other person just interprets the behavior as in some way threatening or harassing. I mean, somebody that didn't go out that day with the intent to cause a problem could potentially be in a drag net. Well, you know, she was yelling at me in the grocery line and it scared me. Police get involved, they have to decide. So in that case, could the woman who was wearing a mask for medical reasons but was intimidating somebody, could she still be charged under this?
No.
No, that's not the goal?
No, that's
Okay.
not, A is not the goal, but we also have that carve out for medical. And the
Okay.
other piece, and I only play a lawyer here in the Judiciary Committee,
Same.
is that there has to be intent. You have to prove that, and that
Okay.
burden of proof has to be proven.
All right, thank you.
Just one other thing that I just wanted, because I think this goes to your question, you know, this is different also than what I would call garden variety harassment. You know, we're also talking about, when we're thinking about bringing back mask laws, you're talking about somebody who, like, from here to here, you know, is totally covered and all you see are somebody's eyes. That's a lot of what we're seeing. Doesn't mean somebody may not wear like a surgical type of mask and intentionally harass somebody, but you're talking about where the mask itself is part of the intimidation also.
Okay, so it has
that
some
is also
social construct around it that people might pick
yes,
up on.
for sure.
Okay.
There is always context, just like a lot of things judiciary debates.
Yeah,
for sure.
I was thinking in my head while you guys were talking, like, why doesn't the current hate crime laws already cover that? Like, do we need something on top of current hate crime laws?
Because it has to do with somebody concealing their identity, so it does make it harder.
To picture.
And that's why, yeah, so if you think back to the KKK when they wore the full hoods and all you could see were their eyes, that was the intent. And we are seeing a lot of that resurgence across the ideological spectrum right now.
Here?
Yes, we have absolutely seen that here in the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of like the sound of this bill because we can get rid of Antifa and the Lincoln Project in one swoop. I do have some questions about overcriminalization. What's the penalty difference between harassment and the harassment defined in this bill?
I don't actually know that off the top of my head.
I think Delegate, I mean, we'll get you that off the top of our head, but just to go to the bill, I think it's all in one fell swoop, right? It's a misdemeanor.
My question is, you can already charge these people with harassment.
Correct.
So what's the penalty difference? Because that charge is a lot easier to charge. There's not all these other qualifications.
We'll get you that answer, Delegate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So under your bill, you have to prove that it's a person's purpose to conceal their identity and their intent to place another person, make them fear. How do you do that if you're a prosecutor?
You want to take that, lawyer?
Can you just repeat that? I just want to make sure I understand the question. Yeah.
Your bill says you can't intentionally harass while hiding or concealing their face with a mask or any other purpose or device with the purpose of concealing the person's identity and with the intent to place another person in reasonable fear of their physical safety. And as a, you know, I'm not an attorney either, but I do know as a prosecutor, I'm going to play hell trying to prove that it was your purpose to conceal your face and you had the intent to place another person in reasonable fear. So how do you prove both of those things?
So I think some of it is going to come down to just like the hate crime laws. There's a burden of proof to prove hate and bias. So I think if somebody is going to take it to court, there's going to be a burden of proof.
Well, it comes back to my first question. Why not just charge them with harassment if you?
Because, well, you can, but the way, if you look, it's actually section C of the bill. Where is it? Hold on, I have it here in front of me.
So it's an additional conviction.
Correct, yes, so it's notwithstanding any other law. So this would be, so in other words, if a person is found guilty of mask intimidation and another crime, they cannot overall have a reduced sentence, in other words.
You could charge them with harassment and harassment with a mask.
Mask, yes,
Okay.
correct. Yes.
Question about section E. Can you explain an affirmative defense for the committee?
Let me just look. What's the specific question?
It is an affirmative defense in a proceeding under this section that a person, et cetera. Can you explain what the affirmative defense is?
So the individual, so if you're, so I think like for weather related, so if you're out skiing and you're in the snow, I don't think that unless you are intentionally, again, harassing, you have to have that first element there. That's an affirmative defense.
So if you get prosecuted, you could say, I was cold and that's why I was wearing a mask.
Yeah, I mean, if you're walking down the street and you're wearing a ski mask, but you're not going into a store and terrorizing marginalized communities or terrorizing anybody else, if you're just wearing it walking down the street, there's no reason.
People in my neighborhood wear a ski mask because it's cold.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with wearing a mask for being cold.
So we're going to say that you have this new crime of wearing a mask, but say it's an affirmative defense for that it's cold.
As long as the element of intentionally harassing, threatening, or intimidating is not there. You have to have that element before anything else for the bill to apply.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Delegate Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, delegate and panelists, for coming in to testify. So a lot of times when they're protesters, they're anti-protesters. Is that correct?
Correct.
And sometimes the protesters, in specific, some of the groups that you talk about, traditionally wear hoods and face covering. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if they're wearing their hood and their face covering, which is a part of their tradition, but some other people feel as though they're being intimidated, they would have an affirmative defense. You keep yelling out KKK, and I don't want to say that. But anyway, since you're talking about the KKK, and they have a right to protest, and they have a right, in my opinion, to wear their traditional garments, what it says right here.
They do, delegate. The entire purpose, and just to take this back to.
Why did you say KKK 8, 9 times?
So let's take it out of KKK. This committee.
Why did you say that?
Well, let's take it out of that context. So the reason why we mentioned
you and I at a
delegate,
sports event.
if you allow me to answer.
At a sports event.
Okay.
And it's cold outside, and you have your mask on, and I have my mask on, and my team is just. They're going to win the Super Bowl, and I'm taunting you, and now you feel intimidated and all of this. Then you say, oh, you know what? He's intimidating me with his mask on. You take your mask off and go get the police. Now, am I intimidating you with a mask on?
Delegate, if you had the intent to
I had the mask
conceal
on.
and
You had yours on at the game.
Okay, one at a time. Ask your question, you'll answer it.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
If you and I get into an escalated debate during a sporting event, and I have my mask on and you don't, and I just happen to make gestures and you feel as though you're intimidated, would I come under consequences of this bill?
No, unless somebody could prove that you had the purpose of concealing your face and intent to harass. That is the point. And delegate, let's take this out of the context of a sporting event. You know, this committee has debated at great length retail theft in particular, right? And in retail theft, I'll use my county, for example, National Harbor. If you're somebody in National Harbor and we have this issue persistently going on, and you put a mask on, and you walk into a store, and you commit a smash and grab, you can argue there, and I'm not the lawyer to argue it, trust me, don't hire me, but you can argue that that person had the intent to conceal their identity and commit a crime. Those are the people we're talking about. If you're at a sporting event and that happens, it's going to be up to the prosecutor to prove that you concealed your face and try to hide your identity and then committed a crime.
Very well. So under the traditionally worn garment, you do agree that I'm correct on that?
I didn't hear your point because we were going back and forth.
If the KKK is wearing their traditional garment and someone feels intimidated because they have a mask on, they would have an affirmative defense under the analysis of this bill. Is that right? I'm looking right at it.
Go ahead.
I think what we may be missing is that I think this bill is about, you have to have two elements. A member of the Ku Klux Klan can wear their traditional garment. They have the right to do so. However, if they do that while they're yelling out racial slurs, while they're committing some type of form of harassment or threatening behavior, that's where this comes in. Because when you conceal your face, if you're yelling at me, let's say you're a member of the KKK, you're yelling at me and causing me to feel threatened or harassed or harmed in some way, then I cannot, because you have covered your face, I cannot seek some level of accountability or criminal prosecution towards you because I don't know who you are. So that's what this is. It's just a two-parter. It's not just wearing masks. Because again, people were wearing masks and having a good time this past weekend at Super Bowl parades and having a wonderful time. That's not the issue. However, if they're cussing everybody out amongst them and threatening them because of some other prejudice that they may have, that is the issue. This is not just an issue of just wearing masks. It's the laws of this state cannot do their job if they cannot identify the person who is a danger or harm to others.
Right, and some people wear their mask at Super Bowls and sporting events so that they are not checked by facial recognition. You have any comment on that?
Yeah, they wouldn't be permit. This has nothing to do with them, right? They didn't commit a crime.
Yeah,
They're not going to be
charged
charged
with
on this.
escalating situation. They start
Even
arguing.
delegate to my previous point, even if it was an escalating event, it'd be up to the prosecutor to prove two things: that it was intentional and that they tried to hide conceal the person's identity.
Thank you, Doug.
Delegate Kaufman.
Yes, I have one question for Ms. Weisel and one question for the sponsor. First question is for the sponsor. Are any LGBTQ groups opposed to this legislation?
No, delegate. Actually, in fact, we have Free State Justice, who actually, and you should see it in your floor system, wrote in favorable testimony.
And Ms. Weisel, you alluded to this, but perhaps if you provide us a brief anecdote about the intimidation that you're seeing in terms of, for my colleagues that have asked why this bill is necessary or have concerns about it, can you give us one or two brief anecdotes as to specific examples of why you think this bill is necessary?
Sure. So there are many, but what I will say is a couple of examples in Maryland. So a couple of years ago, people may remember that the LGBTQ community in particular was harassed at various events by the Proud Boys, which is an extreme white supremacist group. And they were not just targeting adults, they were targeting children with their faces completely concealed. And law enforcement had a very difficult time identifying who any of them were and being able to charge them with any crimes. That's one. Two, the Jewish community in particular, we have seen, unfortunately, on college campuses where many students, I want to be clear, were peacefully protesting the war that is happening over between Israel and Gaza, and many were not peacefully protesting and were following Jewish students completely masked, and I'm talking full masks, where only their eyes were seen, taunting, yelling racial slurs at Jewish students, anti-Semitic slurs at Jewish students while they were trying to walk to their Shabbat services. So we have seen both of that happen in the state of Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm finished.
Why isn't the last example you gave an assault?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Why isn't the last example you gave an assault?
What do you mean, an assault?
Why can't it be charged as a second-degree assault? If they put somebody in immediate fear of an offensive bodily touching, why isn't it assault?
They didn't touch them. I said following. They were following and harassing.
Immediate fear of an offensive touching. That's an assault and a battery. That's under Maryland law.
It could be, but they also couldn't identify who some of the individuals were. And that's what makes it does
So you're
anything
going to put
difficult.
a 90-day penalty on, Delegate Kramer, stop. Please, because it's important questions, and I want to get to this. So you think that adding a 90-day penalty to a 10-year penalty will dissuade someone from wearing a mask?
I think that the intent to wear a mask is particularly to conceal their identity, to be able to be held accountable, period. And I think that's where part of the problem is now.
Delegate Carton.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to follow up because I was going to ask that question. I could not ask it as eloquently as the chairman did. But so it seems to me as if the purpose of this is because of the concealing the identity is the essence of it. And that we're having a hard time. Is it because we're having a hard time identifying the people to be able to charge them? Or is it because using the mask can create additional intimidation factors? Or is it both?
It's both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why not why not just add in, instead of adding additional penalties or an additional crime with penalties, just add in language about using that you know, masks are that maybe perhaps, I'm just trying to think of a better solution, that maybe that they're required to lower their mask if asked by law enforcement or something to that effect? Or is it that the law enforcement's not there at the time? So.
I mean, law enforcement, oh, sorry, you were about to.
No, this is Ms. Weisel.
I mean, law enforcement is not always there. And I think if you think back to just, I mean, you can go back to the 1800s, none of us were around, obviously then, we can go based on what we see today, but the whole point of wearing the masks and the hoods back then, and now the way that we're seeing extremist groups use the masks is the mask itself is part of the intimidation. You know, if somebody is following me down the street and they are screaming anti-Semitic slurs at me or whatever else it is, there is an extra element of fear and safety, and that's why Section C also talks about it's not just if you're charged with regular harassment, the mask essentially adds to it.
So going back to the chair's question, then, you're still not going to be, if you adding a crime with a much smaller sentence is not going to stop the behavior necessarily, because you already have the potential 10-year sentence on an assault if you put somebody in fear of serious bodily harm, right? So why not just charge them with the assault and the hate crime, exactly? I mean,
the example I gave, I don't think is sort of that is certainly what is happening, but I think I'll use the word again, garden variety, what is happening on a more regular basis around streets, you know, as I mentioned, like LGBTQ events and things like that. I don't think that most of those are going to probably rise to the higher level of that 10-year that you're referring to. I think we're trying to, look, it's complex, I understand, I totally understand this is complex, but there is a problem, and this is, based on how the Maryland laws are structured, is where we felt it was best to be addressed.
okay, and one last question.
Yeah, of course.
It's very simple. So I've gotten a lot of emails as well.
Again,
it seems
sorry.
like I have a relatively large Orthodox community. It seems like they're split. I'm trying to figure out if you can explain why some of my Orthodox are very much opposed and some of my Orthodox are very much in favor.
I mean, I can't answer directly for them, but the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington and the Baltimore Jewish Council are both on record supporting. So, and between the two of them, they represent a large majority. And actually, I believe Agudath Israel is on record, which represents the Orthodox community. So I can't, look, I think just like any bill, there's always going to be people within communities that may have, split opinions,
fair
but I
enough.
can't answer for them.
Thank you.
I guess I'm going to go back, though, very briefly, and I see more lights, and I'm going to get to them, but so you could charge a person with a hate crime, that's going to carry 3 years. There's potential, if it's a more serious variety of hate crime, it's another 10 or another 20. And then the 10-year, we had a conversation in here about third-degree assault the other day. Delegate Moon's not here, his aide was here a minute ago. But we had this conversation about second-degree assault, and it's an unwanted touching or putting somebody in the apprehension that they're going to have an offensive touching. And I guess I'm kind of wondering where this 90-day penalty does anything other than add to the annotated code. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that in this committee, you guys do a lot of good work. I'm trying to figure out how we continue to find innovative ways to curb folks from thinking twice when committing crimes, right? Now, if we don't think that 90 days is stiff enough, then that can be a conversation that I'm willing to have with the committee.
Yeah.
And, we can have that conversation.
There is no question this committee, and we've worked on legislation with regard to hate crimes. We'll continue to work with regard to hate crimes. We heard reference from earlier today of a bill that we did in 2019 with regard to a terrible murder at Maryland. No question about that. So I am not in any way looking to minimize what you're trying to bring forward. I just kind of wonder whether the juice is worth the squeeze, but maybe we can talk about it more. Delegate Tolles and Delegate I'm sorry, Phillips. Delegate Tolles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, C-Mate. I just had a question, just for clarification. There was some discussion about sporting games. So, he throwing me a catch. So there was recently an incident, I believe, with that team that beat the Commanders that won the Super Bowl. I don't know who that is, somebody, but because we won Rookie of the Year. But anyway, I digress. So there was an incident because they are known to have a lot of stuff going on at their stadium. I think this individual wore a mask and they couldn't find this person for a while. I think they were like intimidating other fans, like taking, knocking their team hats off and so forth. That's just an example. Maybe you take, January 6th and people, wore masks. I'm trying to think of incidents where this would come into play. Are those examples where this will come into play, particularly at the sporting event where you had I'm gonna knock your hat off because I want to intimidate you and I'm wearing I'm wearing something to hide who I am, so I won't be held accountable. Would that be a situation like this?
Yeah, I could definitely speak to the more the latter comment. The infamous incident at the Capitol is a primary example of that, right? We were able, prosecutors, I'm not a prosecutor, but folks were able to prove that there was intent and that folks were trying to purposefully intimidate and harass and cause issues at the Capitol, and more importantly, that they were also trying to conceal their identities as well. Okay. If you can prove that, then this bill will apply to you. Besides that, it doesn't apply to anyone else.
And it's what you said, Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up. Okay, I can sneak it in because he's not listening. Okay, so just to, and to his point where it may not be heightened to the level of, assault, but it would be something, you can, essentially they're trying to conceal their identity to cause some level of intimidation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Phillips.
So, Ms. Weisel, could this be, or to my colleague from the Urban League, could this be used by police in a situation where there is a rally, LGBTQ, Gaza, whatever, could it be used by the police proactively to address an issue of a large crowd of individuals who are wearing masks?
I don't believe so, and here's why I'll say that. To my good delegate, I think we've been in a lot of protests together. And right now, when you go to a protest line, you go out there and peacefully protest, you tend to end up having some issues that could occur. And folks are using judgment calls and will charge you with disorderly conduct or disturbing the peace or whatever the case may be. Again, the burden of proof here exists with the prosecutor to prove the things that we've been talking about. Intentionality, right, and actually trying to conceal your identity. So that has to be proven for any of this to kind of go into effect.
And maybe I asked that question wrong, and let me, because I'm a little triggered by all of this.
Yeah.
Because I'm a person that's old enough to remember individuals and to have been there to see people in those ropes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And so I'm a little triggered by all of this. But one of the things to the latter part of the 60s in Rising Sun, Maryland, some of these issues were addressed because people would be, right, potentially arrested just for wearing the mask, right, and intimidating people in churches, intimidating, and yours doesn't say that, but I'm trying to figure out how do we maybe get there, because I think that's what we're really trying to deal with. And I am triggered by all of this.
Yeah.
But that's really where we're trying to get to. I remember those days. I know you all think I'm too young, but no, I'm not.
No, Delegate, I think that's exactly what we're trying to get to here. And it's no secret that in Maryland, there's been a rise of hate crimes year after year after year. And unfortunately, we don't see that changing, right? And so we've got to do something in this moment in time to curb and have people think twice before trying to continue to commit these crimes that are happening.
And that in and of itself would not be an assault, right? The mere showing up is not an assault.
No, not at all.
The intimidation associated with it may not be an assault.
I would defer to the lawyers on that one.
I don't know. Maybe that's the chair. But
believe
anyway,
so, yeah.
I get where you're going with this. Maybe we have to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, thank you, Delegate.
30 seconds. Delegate Grammer, 30 seconds. Delegate Connie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's what I love about this committee. So the crime of harassment in Maryland, a person may not follow another in or about a public place or maliciously engage in a course of conduct that alarms or seriously annoys the other with the intent to harass, alarm, or annoy the other person. I think a lot of the activities we're describing today fall squarely under that. Like, it's actually illegal to alarm or annoy another person. And the reason I bring this up is because I had a constituent who tried to get this prosecuted. It is an issue that would have fallen under a hate crime, but it was harassment. And the reality is harassment is really hard to prosecute. But in your cases, it's clearly an offense that would fall under harassment. And the charge has a 90-day penalty. So why wouldn't we be able to charge the crimes you're explaining under the current criminal penalty of harassment, which has a much lower bar?
I'm going to defer to their attorneys here.
So I'm going to answer it, but I want to look into it a little bit more because I think that the intent here is, I'm going to go back to what I was talking about, is about concealing your identity also with the purpose. So certainly, I think a lot of what you're describing, could potentially fall under the current harassment laws, but you don't have that element where there could be an additional penalty potentially if somebody is purposely concealing their identity. What we're talking about here and what we're trying to capture, and again, we can wordsmith a lot of things and we can certainly look at, and work with the committee on this. We're talking about a lot of bad actors out there. I'm not talking about just like, again, the conversation Delegate Phillips was bringing up, people going to protest, people wandering the streets. But we're talking about extremists here across the ideological spectrum who are using this tactic to cause fear and intimidation in our community, similar to what we saw many years ago, and we have to figure out a way to capture it. This is how we thought presenting it based on how the current bill is drafted was the best way. If the committee wants to look at the current harassment laws and how we may be able to define it a little bit differently, we can certainly discuss that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Conway, 30 seconds.
Chair, 30 seconds. I just want to say sometimes you'll go to these sporting events, and if your team loses, and the other guy that's next to you, his team wins, he might slap my hat off and stomp on it, and that's part of the game. But I appreciate you bringing the bill. Thank you.
Well, Delegate
But
Conaway.
it's also a second-degree assault. It's also an assault.
Yeah.
And that's, so you could be charged for that. And if it were done with an animus, it's a hate crime with another 3 years on top of it. But in any case, thank you very much.
Thanks so
Welcome
much,
to
Mr. Chair.
Judiciary. Thanks for stopping by.
Always fun to be
This was
here.
Delegate Boafo's first bill in front of Judiciary. No, we're not asking him any more questions.
And you have many more to go.
It probably won't stop him. Thank you very much. That concludes.
I warned him.
All right, that concludes the testimony.
I've been here enough times with you guys. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 1081. Here is what we're going to do.